Alex Newman is the host of the Alex Newman Show on Unified TV and joins us now to talk about this. So there's outrage. And of course, you can see all over social media, Alex, that people say, did you sign up for this? When you voted for Trump, did you know that he was going to destroy the Department of Education? And therefore, he's going to destroy our education of our young people across the United States. And I think we're in last place as it is. So I don't know how much more destruction is going to happen. But, do you see panic in the streets right now? And what are they trying to cover up for, Alex? What's your sense of why they're so outraged?
Well, it's great to see you again. Thank you very much for having me, Clayton. And it would be impossible to destroy education more than it has already been destroyed. And that's not my opinion. I mean, just look at the U.S. government's own data. The Department of Education does what they call the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And their own data shows that less than 1 in 3 victims of the public school system in the United States are even proficient in any core subject. That includes English, writing, reading, math, history, science. So it's hard to imagine a system that was worse than this. Of course, there's a lot of shrieking from the teachers' unions. There's a lot of shrieking from the people who depend on this so-called education system. And, when we spend $1 trillion a year on so-called education, there's a lot of people who make their living based on this giant scam. So Donald Trump's doing the right thing. He's moving us in the right direction. He's not going to be able to wind this whole thing down by himself. He's going to need help from Congress. He's going to need help from the states. He's going to need help from the American people. But this is certainly a step in the right direction, a baby step, because as you pointed out, the federal government has no business in education under our Constitution. But this, I believe, is one of the most critical issues. Long way still to go. But as DOGE starts unraveling some of this stuff, I think Americans are going to be shocked all across the political spectrum.
Let's educate our audience a little bit on the history of this, because the only reason we have a Department of Education in the first place is because of the civil rights movement and the fear that, hey, we got to get rid of, we can't have teachers teaching our kids. Basically like a revolution. Just going to let the inmates run the asylum is basically where this came out of. So it was, the Department of Education was born out of this sort of chaos of that period in the 1970s and 1960s that gave rise to the Department of Education. I think a lot of Americans have no idea, and I want to kind of drill a little bit more deeply in this. Natali did a great piece on this the other day here on the show about how in April of 1983, the Department of Education, we discovered that, of course, it was a nation at risk, that we had an imperative for educational reform, an open letter to the American people. It showed basically how we are selectively making ourselves dumber. It's a national security threat. I'm going to read this for you on the screen. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves. We've even squandered the gains in student achievement made in the wake of the Sputnik Challenge. Moreover, we've dismantled essential support systems which help make those gains possible. We have, in effect, been committing an act of unthinking, unilateral education disarmament. Unbelievable. So we were sabotaging ourselves, and I don't think the American people understand this.
You're absolutely right, Clayton. And that report was just the tip of the iceberg. I quote it regularly. My latest book, it just came out recently. It's been endorsed by a lot of Trump's top people, including his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. I go back to the very beginning of this story with the first guy back in the early 1800s to seriously propose that the government, the coercive power of the state ought to be involved at all in the education of children. People don't realize that this experiment that the government educates children is very new. It's been a catastrophic failure. They didn't have most of our kids in government schools until the aftermath of World War I, when they sent the men to go die, the women into the factories. And it was always designed to dumb our children down, to turn them against their families, to turn them against Christianity, to turn them against their country. And this is very easy to prove, Clayton. I've got smoking gun primary source documents from the people who built this system. So the Department of Education at the federal level was just the icing on the cake. The system was a disaster long before that. Yes, you're right, the civil rights movement and really the teachers union, right? It was the NEA that insisted that Jimmy Carter had to go ahead and do this. And the first person to propose that we should have a U.S. Department of Education, at least very publicly, was a leading communist, Z. Soster. And he said that we needed a U.S. Department of Education that would cleanse the education system of patriotism, of Christianity, of bourgeois ideology, so that we could have a revolution in this country. That was 100 years ago, and they have been working to destroy our young people and to fundamentally transform our country through education ever since.
Let's listen to President Trump talk about abolishing the Department of Education. He's talked about this on the campaign trail, so this shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. Watch.
And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse. We're going to end education coming out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up, all those buildings all over the place, and you have people that in many cases hate our children. We're going to send it all back to the states. Thank you very much.
So I want to ask you, Alex, because now this goes to the states. What's the machinery here? Because now it's going to go to the states, and you have a state like New Jersey, a place where I used to live, and this is unbelievable because that new bill, I think it was New Jersey Bill A1669, just passed. It's a disaster, and basically that state standards would sort of eliminate state standards in a lot of ways. So who would choose to move there and put their kids there? Now they'll have to sort of compete for your business. But a lot of people just can't up and move. They don't have the money to just I'm going to move to South Carolina and what's going to happen to these states now that they're sort of in control with these standards, do you think?
Well, it's a very good question, Clayton. And I would say, first of all, it's going to be very, very difficult to remove the influence from above from state educational systems. A lot of these states have already adopted the Common Core state standards based on Bill Gates, based on the Obama administration, based on the Every Student Succeeds Act that was passed by Republicans. Obama called it a Christmas miracle. And so that's not going to be unwound anytime quickly. But you're right. A lot of these states, California, New Jersey, Illinois, they're more radical even than what the federal government has been promoting. Then you look at what UNESCO, the UN's education agency, is pushing, including the World Core Curriculum, which is based, according to the guy who wrote it, on the teachings of Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. You realize we're dealing with a train wreck here. And I would urge parents to understand, even if the education goes back to the state level, which is, again, a good step in the right direction, these schools are not going to be a safe place to send your children if you want them to learn how to read, if you want them to learn math, if you want them to learn decent values, if you want them to know which bathroom they should be going in, right? You need to understand the education system is very much like a hydra with a lot of different tentacles. U.S. Department of Education is one of those tentacles, and you can cut off that tentacle, and the beast will keep devouring your children if you keep putting them close enough, and the tentacles will just grow right back in other forms and other guises. So we're dealing here with a systematic problem. Took generations to get into this mess. And as much as I support what Donald Trump is trying to do here, I think, again, it's only a baby step in the right direction. And parents need to beware. This is one of the most important decisions you'll make in your life. Make a good one.
Oh, I totally agree. Well said. And before I let you get out of here, Alex, let's just talk a little bit about Teach for America and Bill Clinton's plan, right? Sounded great, right? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to incentivize you to become a teacher, and you're going to move into the sort of an inner city. We're going to cover the cost, I think, of your education, but you have to go to work in like an inner city, sort of a troubled school, I think for, I don't know if it was 3 years or something like that. Then you can go off and go wherever you want. But that's part of the plan. But it was much more nefarious than that. So when you talk about this is like a generational unwinding here, we're talking about activists, right? So many of these teachers they're not teachers, they're activists pushing an agenda, whether it's trans ideology or other BS on these children. And it all came out of this Teach for America. Am I wrong about that? Maybe you can really elaborate more with your depth of knowledge on this.
You're absolutely right. And if you look, for example, the people in charge of the teachers union, the people who run the Teach for America program, we need to understand we're not dealing with educators in the sense that normal people think of when they think of educators, people who are going to impart knowledge, wisdom, abilities, skills to your children. We're dealing with people here who have a very clear ideological viewpoint, who have a very clear vision for where they want our country to go, our society to go, that is entirely at odds with the system bequeathed to us by our nation's founders, by the people who wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And so they see education as a means to an end. And this didn't even start with the recent stuff. You go back to the NEA when it was taken over by John Dewey, who became a lifetime honorary chairman. These guys were crystal clear. He went to the Soviet Union and celebrated what was happening there in a series of magazine articles. obstacles. He understood education is a means to an end. The left understands this. The totalitarians understand this. The globalists understand it. It's just regular middle-class Americans that haven't yet caught on here. This isn't a mistake. The system is actually working very, very well. And you got to go way back into history to see how we ended up at this point. And the more you learn, the more you will be absolutely horrified.
Deeply troubling. Tell our audience the name of your book so people can go and buy it right now and make it a bestseller.
Well, thank you so much. It's called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools' War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. It's available anywhere good books are sold. And like I said, it's been endorsed by General Michael Flynn, Peter Hegseth, Roger Stone, Glenn Beck. You name it, lots of great Americans, because, as I said, I believe this is the single most important issue. We're going to lose all the other issues if we allow them to brainwash 85% of our kids. That's where we're at right now, and so I hope people will take a little bit from their busy day and recognize we've got to deal with this one. This is the do-or-die issue, and thank you very much for having me on, Clayton, to talk about this.
My pleasure, Alex. The book, again, is called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools' War on Faith, Family, and Freedom. You can find it wherever books are sold. Go there and check it out and do a little reading of it. I think we need to save our education system, and this is, you're right, the most important thing we can be doing right now as a nation to fix this. I really appreciate it. Alex, great to see you as always. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.